I think, because you'd expect underreporting of certain things. But there are many, there are many news stories you have, say in the 30s, when we're not exactly that primitive, and you have millions of people dying from these climate-related famines. I mean, China in particular, I have a lot of quotes about in Fossil Future. It is really just tragic to see these talks about, oh, this flood happened or this drought happened. It just wipes out millions of people, and their lives are just over forever because they cannot cope with the naturally dangerous climate. Whereas if you think about the amount of development that has happened, our mastery, things like flood control in that case, as I mentioned before, drought relief, that's really what's taken the naturally dangerous climate and made it unnaturally safe. But part of the reason we can't see this is we're taught this false view that nature, including climate, is what I call a delicate nurturer. That's kind of this stable, sufficient, safe place, and that our impact ruins it. And this is really a myth, but it's really widely believed, including, I think, implicitly by many scientists. And so we just think of climate as perfect, and then we ruined it. So it's not even on our radar that we have actually made climate much better by mastering it.
I mean, this is a fascinating thought process of literally the antithetical view of our relationship with climate. Do you have like a really good example that people could wrap their heads around in terms of a place where humans have actually made it drastically better from a climate perspective compared to maybe the overarching thought process around it making it worse?
I mean, I can't think of any place where we haven't made it much better, because we've made it much better in what I call the empowered world, the places with low cost, reliable energy that you can use to develop, but also the unempowered world. And so, I mean, you could take either one, but just consider the United States. I mean, we have every form of climate imaginable here, which is part of why I don't worry about the kinds of changes people are even speculating, let alone what I think is realistic in the global climate system. So you have something like polar Alaska, and then you have swampy Florida, and where I live in California is not perfect climate politically, but I think it's a perfect climate in terms of just, that really nice kind of dry climate near the ocean. So we have every climate imaginable, and we all live really long lives, and we don't have that much trouble with climate. Climate is a rhetorical thing in our lives. Like, it's a rhetorical negative. But life used to be an emergency in general because people were poor. And in particular, it was a climate emergency because of, even something like a harvest. So maybe a harvest is a great example. Just, we don't think now of something like the Dust Bowl being possible. And it really isn't possible to us now because of modern irrigation and other modern technology. But all of this depends on machines. And the ability to use machines at a very large scale depends on low cost, reliable energy. And that's part of why I think fossil fuels are so crucial, because I'm going to argue this goes to the second point, but they're a uniquely cost-effective form of energy. They're not at all rapidly replaceable by solar and wind.
So I was going to ask, the second premise is that they are replaceable, and not just replaceable, but rapidly replaceable. And I think built into this premise is not only rapidly replaceable, but also remaining as low cost or lower cost as what is available via fossil fuels. So unpack for me this premise and what you agree or disagree with.
Well, to unpack this premise, I actually have to introduce a missing premise. And this is actually one of the problems with the argument. You can think of it as one or two missing premises. I'll break it down into two quickly. One is the fact that the world has woefully little energy. There is far more energy needed in the world. So one statistic that I think drives this home is that there are 3 billion people, so 3 billion individuals, who in their lives are using less electricity than one of our refrigerators. So you just think about that, like all the electricity in their life, right? So washers, dryers, I mean, these aren't happening, but you think about like incubators, refrigeration for vaccines, lights, all of these things have to somehow take up the same amount of electricity as a refrigerator. And what do you think happens? Just people have incredibly impoverished lives. But there are 3 billion people right now around the world. This is their life. You would consider this, I'm not saying you, but just the audience, we would consider this a catastrophe, right? If we woke up one day and we used less electricity than a refrigerator, and that was our life, we would consider that a crisis. And so this is the way I think of the world. I think the world is in a perpetual state of crisis because, for most people, because of poverty, which is very, very related to what's called energy poverty, lack of energy. And the reason I'm bringing this in is that the ESG movement doesn't really think about this. So what they do is they say, yeah, oh yeah, we can rapidly replace fossil fuels, sure. But they don't acknowledge the fact that the world needs something like 4 times more energy if everyone is to be even remotely close to us. And why should we think that we should have the opportunity to flourish and others shouldn't? That makes no sense at all. So everyone in the world should rightly want to use a lot of energy. And the fact that that is not coming up front and center, and all we're talking about is how do we get rid of the fossil fuel we use now, but which is 80% of the world's energy and actually growing. And we're not talking about like how to provide energy on a much larger scale. That points to there's not much valuing of energy. And this is the second premise, which is just energy is incredibly valuable because energy gives us the ability to use machines to become far more productive and prosperous. And so the real thing with the ESG is not just those two premises that are wrong, but it's leaving out the massive need for more energy and the massive value of energy. And then that leads to, is its claim of rapid replaceability valid? But once you look at it from the perspective I just gave, it's pretty obvious it's not, right? Fossil fuels provide 80% of the world's energy. They're growing fast, particularly growing fast in the parts of the world that care the most about cost-effective energy, namely China. So there's clearly something special about them that isn't disappearing anytime soon. By the way, we're in an energy crisis for lack of fossil fuels, which have been heavily restricted by the ESG movement. So that's another blow against it. And they're saying that we can rapidly replace fossil fuels, mostly with solar and wind, that are currently 3% of the world's energy and that exist as parasites on the reliable electricity provided mostly by fossil fuels, but also by nuclear and hydro, and that do not exist at all in standalone form for electricity, let alone the 80% of the world's energy that is not electricity. So I submit this is a total crackpot idea that this is all going to happen in 27 and a half years. And in particular, this idea has been around for over a decade and fossil fuel use has grown dramatically. So what I consider this whole ESG argument of replaceability, it's not a real argument by people who understand or care about energy. It's a fake argument designed to reassure us that it's okay to get rid of fossil fuels and we won't suffer any consequences.